We doing this?
Beetlejuice.
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 My name is Mark Scruton. I'm the production designer on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice.
I'm David Morison, set decorator on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Mark, can you describe Beetlejuice Beetlejuice to me in 3 words?
I think Beetlejuice is sort of handmade insanity.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I think that should be on the film poster.
Working on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, I think the main thing was to make everything real.
Oftentimes, what you see on set looks so different than what you see on camera, but here you're getting exactly what you're seeing in the final product, which is really, really amazing.
To dig into that aesthetic of the first film, which was that it wanted to feel handcrafted, as opposed to digital or super slick.
And that's the fun of this. There's that feeling that somebody made this, you know, like handmade it.
Recognize this puss.
Never seen that chick before in my life, or afterlife.
As the production designer, I'm in charge of the look of the whole film, and it's my job to take the script that I'm given and turn it into reality. So take all the elements, all the environments, and create a world that is true to what my director, in this case Tim Burton, has in mind.
Well, you've got the hard job. I'm just a bit of fluff. You're the sort of...
When have you ever been described as a bit of fluff, David?
set decorator fills in the gaps. I'll go and find the furniture. I'd get the flooring, everything that is not structural, I suppose. I guess that's what a set decorator does. Decorates a set.
Something I did quite early on, I went through and screen grabbed the first film, almost frame by frame, and built this reference book. For instance, yes, this was a particular one here with Beetlejuice flyer, because we had to do a similar flyer this time around.
Ew.
There's so many images that were very specific, even down to this sort of detail of how the brickwork opened when the door opens into the afterlife. The key thing to the afterlife compared to the real world environments was that everything was distorted and warped. Whether that was the furniture, whether that was the walls, it had to discombobulate you in that environment.
Yeah, I've never done the afterlife before, so it was a new experience, and we wanted it to be like you've been at a party and you've had a bit too much to drink.
One thing we did with the floors, all the checkerboard floors were distorted and deliberately designed to go against the perspective of the sets. So even if the floors aren't actually raked or angled or anything else, you feel like they are. So regularly people would walk on the set and lose their footing because their eyes couldn't figure out what they were looking at. The colour palettes on the film were quite specific to the different areas we were shooting in. So I think because we had so many different environments that had to be separate. So the real world, the afterlife, the model interior. We had to work on different palettes and different ways of showing that. But specifically with the afterlife, it was all about metallics. All the walls were painted initially in a chromy silver color, and then each one was tinted then into a different, slightly warmer tone or a slightly cooler tone, depending on the worlds we were doing. So Wolf Jackson's office was a slightly warmer, woodier tone because he had the wooden paneling and everything else. The boiler room was slightly more into the green world because Beetlejuice normally came with the green light, but then the real world was much more down to earth. But I think the key thing in the real world was everything was generally more monotone, but then you get the red signature sort of pop, and every set had that in it.
Where's Beetlejuice?
The first time actually we had Michael Keaton on set as Beetlejuice was in the boiler room.
Which is the set where they're trying to sell the afterlife.
We'd set up the desk, and you'd put in all sorts of stuff, kind of expecting that they would come on and maybe take some bits off or choose some favourites and everything else. And they literally walked on, like, this is great! And they just started shooting with all the stuff, and the world's best boss mug.
The fun that everyone was having, I haven't seen that on a set in a long time. Everyone who worked on it, you could tell, really enjoyed showing up for work.
I'm needed upstairs. Bob, hold down the fort.
So in the first film, at the very end, we see Beetlejuice sat in the waiting room, and he's sat next to an explorer whose head is shrunken. And we've taken that character now and made them a whole thing. So he's now got a whole team of shrinkers running his sales team.
We built the desks because there's 16 desks that were matching.
The desks had to be slightly oversized to make the shrinkers look right, because they've got a whole assembly on, which then puts their head slightly higher, so everything is slightly overscale with them.
For whatever reason, Mark decided to make sloping floors. So to sort of try and make all that secure and work was a challenge. It was fun, but it was a challenge. We had some very large, heavy metal filing cabinets. We had to tie all those off to the back wall, and I bought some plant pot stands and wedged them under the filing cabinet edges and under chair legs to make everything wonky. I was on the set when Winona Ryder saw the attic set. I think it was the first time she'd seen the model in 40 years. She seemed to be quite emotional about that. As you would be, I would be too.
It's sort of indescribable
experience. It's remarkable. You just wanted to soak it in.
We sort of chopped the set in half, and then had half of it was the TV set, and then the other side of it was wheeled in, and we did the whole model set. We employed an art director, Ian Bunting, who spent weeks looking at Mark's book and the film and drew every building and went off with a model making company that built it.
It was interesting because it had to feel like the Maitlands had built it, and it was the original model.
It took a lot longer to do that model than I thought it would.
It took longer to do that than it did some of the bigger sets, didn't it?
It
'Cause
did.
everything had to be hand painted because you knew the camera was going to be this far away from it.
And it also had to come to pieces in certain places so that they could pull it apart to film it and for him to rise up through it.
Yes.
The juice is loose.
Like there was in the original film, there's several sequences where we go into the model where everything is scaled up, so you feel like you're inside a model. And one of the key ones, which was prominent in the first one, was the grass. You could tell from watching the original film it was something they'd sourced. We couldn't find anything remotely like it that had that same look, so we had to hand sculpt it and craft it. So we ended up with the grass, which I then sliced up and gave to people as gifts, which is what this is at the end. So everyone had a little piece of
I've got one of those
Beetlejuice
on my
grass.
wall.
My mom grew up here, that old house on the hill.
In the first film, the Dietz house is so ingrained into the psyche of the world. Tim and I had a conversation about it, and he was like, we need to go back. We can't do this film if we don't go back to the original place. We built the whole house again exactly as it had been before in exactly the same spot. You could still see a little bit of depression in the ground where the original one had been built. When I first drove back there, I drove up the hill and their house was on top of the hill. It was like all the hair stood up on the back of my arm. It's like, oh my God, this is what the film's all about. It's interesting. This is one of my first little things we did, sitting down and actually studying the house and trying to figure out how we were going to build it. And there's so much of it you don't see in the film as well. So trying to figure out what happens around the back and how everything works. So many people think it was a house that everyone just turned up and shot at. But it's very much not. It's a very unusual building.
The waiting room was an iconic set from the first film that we had to sort of reproduce exactly in this film.
The afterlife is filled with the most insanely, horrifically beautiful characters. There was a guy in a cage, there was a dead Santa, but there was a woman, a puppeteer inside him, beside me on the couch.
When it came to recreating the waiting room set, some of the drawings did exist in the Warner Brothers archive. They're incredibly fragile and they couldn't leave the archive, so we had to have them photographed.
We were literally looking at stills from the film of people sitting on sofas and sort of measuring the size of the lamps next to them by the actors' human proportions. It's the only way we could get a scale. And then they ended up drawing these lamps out, and they were sort of this big, and I was thinking, surely they're not that big, but they are. We had a great still of this leather armchair, and I found this one. It was one of the first ones I saw. It had the same front profile, so we bought it for £10. And when we got it back and took off the soft cushion, it was almost exactly the right shape. And Tim Burton, when he announced the launch of the film, if you go to his Instagram account, there's a picture of him sitting on it. The train set was not particularly difficult for us.
It was different for me.
Yeah, it was hard for you, yeah.
What does the tube station look like in the afterlife? There was a train which we managed to rent and brought it back to the studio, and then we completely re-sculpted the front of it. Again, everything was hand sculpted, so these two poly sculptors created this sort of amazing skull face on the front of it.
Mark was able to get hold of a New York subway carriage. The graphics team put some fantastically witty posters on the inside of. Apart from the clock and some light fittings, there wasn't a great deal for set deck. We did those false perspective tunnels.
Tim wanted to show the train arriving, looking straight down the tunnel, and I was like, well, we've only got 20, 30 feet down the tunnel. We literally put a big film lamp on a tube and pushed it down the thing with an iris on it, so the iris opened up as the train got closer. So you got this huge bright light coming down this forced perspective tunnel.
And on the other side of the platform, they wanted a run of lights. So we got some stanchions and sort of put industrial-looking light fittings on them. But of course, when it's going down the tunnel, we had to make smaller and smaller and smaller. And
then we made the station this sort of irregular shape. The big staircase going up, none of them are the same height, none of them same depth. They're all on different angles. And there's not one straight angle in the entire set, which the dancers absolutely hated me for.
And they're all wearing great big platform shoes.
Huge platform shoes, yeah. So generally, I wasn't popular at all on that set from anybody at all.
That's quite correct, yes. Normally I do a set count, and I probably did for this, and off the top of my head, I would say 40.
It's more than that.
More than that?
Yeah, I think my list was like 87, I think, the last time I looked.
87. I was going to say that. We did 87 sets.
I think my favourite set piece in Beetlejuice is probably the flashback sequences we did for when we find out how Beetlejuice and Dolores first met. It was all designed on this big angle. We had a huge painted backing with a cutout of a moon hanging that was painted silver so it reflected the light.
My favourite set piece was Jeremy's bedroom. There's a lot of me in that set.
That was the one you were happiest in.
Yeah.
It was meant to be this retro teen bedroom, 90s based, and
Yeah, exactly.
your musical knowledge was invaluable, so I just said,
He's
go
stuck
away
in
and
the
make it
90s.
real.
Definitely, it reminded me of my youth. It was a bit bigger than my bedroom was.
Let's go, honey.
If I could take one thing home...
Well, I would say the grey armchair, but my wife wouldn't let me.
I think the model. I put it up in my attic because it's just a beautiful thing to look at and study, and I could look at it for hours, and I did look at it for hours, in fact. Working on Beetlejuice, it was really a chance to explore what Tim really, really wanted to do. This was his pet project that he'd been gestising for sort of 30 years.
It's a fantastic script. It was a unique bunch of sets to be asked to do, and a fantastic challenge.